union with x3 and subtract x3, you get these lines here, and typically these lines you will get inside. And this is a process, and then you will get further inside, and then finally you get this. Taking the union of all these outputs, you get actual valley network within the DEM, that is this. No, you don't see the internal boundaries of thresholded elevation regions as systematic as shown here. And many a times you see one elevation contour is this, another elevation contour is this, another elevation contour, another elevation contour is that. You can actually compute the network here. This would give us, and in no commercial software you would be available, these transformations. But in MATLAB and Python, you have all these simple routines you can implement. But one, I'm not sure, and can you really tune your structuring element? Because the structuring element that I have chosen here is like this, you got this kind of final skeletal network. If you choose a slightly different structuring element, probably the origin here, where B is not equivalent to B transpose, and you see a completely different skeletal network. And but that reconstruction, if you know what type of B that you have used to construct the network, skeletal network, you can reconstruct back to original set. If you don't know what is the B that you have used to compute the network, and you cannot reconstruct it back. It has many computer science applications, but as I see in geomorphology, extraction of the river network under all situations, whether it is fluvial or tidal or very gently sloped region, and you can really implement this. Because what is the factor that is taken advantage here? Curvature. Any sharp curve is typically a potential flow path for the streamline. You can look at that, the granulations in the contours, granulations in the contours, and that would really help understanding how important is those isolation of all possible granulations in a region embedded within a specific contour would lead you to get this skeletal network. All possible skeletal networks from all possible thresholded elevation regions decomposed from the spatial function, that is our DEM in our case, would eventually get you the well connected network. You might ask me, can we really avoid all these decompositions in between? Can I apply directly on DEM? What would happen? If you, it requires a slightly different morphological operations, and I am saying that I want to use directly f of xy, and I want to compute the skeleton of f of xy. What would it give? I cannot directly use this binary erosions and dilations. We evidently require grayscale erosions and dilations. Further, to compute the grayscale opening and grayscale closing. Before getting into that, let me just finish up, conclude it here. So when DEM is like this, whatever that you have computed at the end is a valley connectivity network. Now you invert the DEM, in turn 4 has become 1, 3 has become 2, 2 has become 3, and this has become 4. And then you apply the same ideas, and whatever you get is the ridge lines. The ridge lines. Right? The same skeletonization transformation on DEM and inverted DEM. See, if you have no energy to invert the DEM, and you have to spend more energy to write the equations, the inverse equations. Instead of erosions, you perform dilations. Instead of opening, you perform closing. And then you do that same process, right? So, okay, now for directly computing the valley connectivity network and ridge connectivity network from the original DEM without decomposing that DEM into threshold elevation regions, we require grayscale erosions and dilations. And the just notations are the basic differences. F erosion by B, the function we always use f of xy is written as minimum of f of x plus I, y plus j, where ij belongs to B. What exactly is this? When you have so time is there. When you have let us say this is DEM. So these values are, as I mentioned, it's in between 255. You have let us say 255, 254, 64, 196, 32. These are all elevation values in normalized form. 32, 61, 54, 52. Some idea sake I am giving it here. So this f of x plus y and I plus I and y plus j is typically you are considering a specific window. Within that window, if there are, let us say, within this window there are 9 values, 9 neighborhood values, and a central value would be replaced with a most minimum value out of this 9. And then you convolve, you go to the next level. Initially, actually, this 3 by 3 you have to consider, and though we don't have in the background, but we assume that in the background, when you are performing grayscale erosion, and you will assume the background is padded with 255. In many MATLAB routines, people would get confused when they are performing grayscale erosion, and background pixels would actually influence. To avoid having an influence, so spurious influence of the background in the eroded version of the function, and we pad the outline with 255, so that because what we are taking the most minimum value, and this 255 will not influence. And then you consider out of, let us assume that these are all 255, 255, 255, 255. And then this is also 255. To replace this value, you consider within this 9 and what is the most minimum value, you replace that. So 32 it would, this is an output file, we will write another file. And then you move to the next 3 by 3. So then you look at what is the most minimum value, replace this, and this goes on. The actual interpretation of this equation is this, right? And then further, and what is its dual operation? Dual operation is instead of taking minimum, we will take maximum here. F of x plus I, y plus j, again I and j belongs to B. And instead of taking minimum, you take the maximum. And in turn, you have grayscale erosion dilation you got. What would be the B here? B by default, we are taking like a 3 by 3. You can take a similar B. When you take similar B, and you have to consider these are the values. And within that neighborhood 5 values, what is the most minimum value? You take that. You can define and design your B according to your own will and wish, as long as there is a proper justification. There is a proper justification. In many geomorphic contexts, I would take a lake is a geomorphic feature. And lake, when it is getting flooded, you have to simulate that process. So, are all lakes getting flooded in an isotropic way? No, some lakes they follow slope. One specific side only it gets flooded. The other side there is a kind of barrier and it doesn't allow it to get flooded. And to simulate that, you can tune your B by choosing if this is the lake, if this is the lake, and you know that it is getting only flooded in this direction, and you can simulate that process by following a simple morphological dilation, and but where I will choose probably B like this, but origin here. When I choose an origin at this corner, it gets dilated only in this direction. There nothing will happen in this direction. So that conditional dilations we can perform by changing the characteristic information of your B. See, we cannot really directly show mathematical morphology applications in geomorphology overnight, but have a thinking for sure, because you are all very young and you will have a completely different direction of thinking. So what I could think for the last 20-25 years is applying skeletonization to get these networks, and then applying these operations to compute the roughness broadly, and then applying these operations to perform interpolations and extrapolations. There are many other things, not actually from geomorphology, but from spatial data science. The spatial data science, we talk about directional relationships, topological relationships. How far is object A from object B? Is the distance between object A to object B is the same? Is the distance between object B to object A is same? And why they are not same? These are all spatial reasoning. But one thing I always were looking at is they said in Perron paper and Whipple paper, the valley segment is equally spaced between the two embedded ridges. Actually, they are not. If you carefully look at, and the distance between the segment to one side the ridge and the distance between this segment to the other side ridge, they are differing. They are not exactly at the middle. See, there is a transformation called medial axis transformation. You have a black road like a ribbon, and you want to put a divider. You typically follow median line. What is that middle pixel, middle point, and then we put a divider there. But is this ridge valley spacing as systematic as the divider line that we are putting on the road? I think this one should really explore. One should really explore, and I was talking to so many people, and I don't have energy to really implement those ideas. But you look at one, you take a basin, probably some Himalayan region, and extract this river network segments or valley connectivity network segments, and then find out its dual, that is the ridge, and then each segment, its the distance between that segment to the other side ridge and the other side ridge. We all agree, right? And a valley is embedded between two ridges. And what is the distance between this to this? And what is the distance between this to this? But in a qualitative sense, and everybody is telling that equally spaced. It is actually not equally spaced. Exactly. Exactly. I think from geomorphic sense, I think that throws some light. Why the distance is more in this direction, why distance is less in this direction. Even if it is a minor point like, oh, this is a physiographic conditions, physiographic constitution, and that one point itself is a step forward, right? And in quantitative sense, so why it is probably for one segment, the distance and this distance, if you take the ratio, you call that as some index, and you look for all the segments and how that index is changing. So at a very highly hilly region, is that index is different? At the lower reaches, is that index different? Because there it is well controlled, and here it is loosely controlled. I don't know. These are all, again, I say, many used to say, oh, these are philosophical speculations. Actually not, and somebody should try and prove. We'll take a break.
Sir, In the first part, where, yeah, my question is actually, so suppose I am here, there is a one pixel and this is another pixel, and I want to find out that whether this pixel is at higher elevation or lower elevation, we can do this transformation. By doing this transformation, I think you are explaining that uh, taking me as a B and this is an X, we can come up with the conclusion that this part is higher and this is lower. But in the case of suppose there is a satellite there, a reference point is already there, and I am at a, let's say, lower elevation, and this is at a higher elevation, and since satellite is fixed, so from that also it is obvious that I am at a lower elevation and this is at a higher elevation. So this the mathematical this erosion dilation transformation that you have shown, is it valid for those kind of uh, uh, like this is the case of SRTM. So is this where it will be valid? Like when this information is not there, can I use this mathematical transformation to find out uh, whether this pixel is higher or lower? Actually, I'm trying to understand that where
Understood.
this transformation is used.
I'll tell you.
Is it used in SRTM also?
Satellite is here, and you have taken a picture. Satellite took the picture. From the same satellite, the same region was taken as a picture with a slightly different angle. Because satellites won't give you DEMs directly. You get the sensed image, and by fusing these sensed images, registering, and then you see a slight variation when you try to. I don't know. In geography, you must have seen this stereographic. I have an ancient PhD. I used to put a stereoscope and I used to look at. I don't have stereoscopic vision, and my guru used to tell, "Are you seeing they're projecting? Nothing is happening. I have very high eyesight." And they used to tell. But many people they used to map. So that is the principle involved in registering these two left and right images, and then finally they compute the heights by caching that parallax principle. And those height images that they generate is actually DEM, right? To your question, the DEM that is generated from the images taken by the satellite at this height, and if I push the satellite further up, and the DEM that I generate eventually would be with much lesser resolution, right? And I can push further up and then much lesser resolution. So we cannot push the satellite very often, and but can we simulate that process without pushing the satellite up? And I will do this process. Recursive openings when I do on the DEM directly, not the binary openings, grayscale openings. Probably I'll explain it after we come back from lunch. And if I iteratively perform multi-scale opening on a specific DEM, probably of 30-meter resolution, I can lower its resolution. There is no way I can enhance its resolution, because the features which are not there cannot be generated, but features which are there I can suppress. And this nonlinear morphological opening operation is the best operation to generate a DEM at multiple coarser resolutions, which is very much useful in the computational graphics. That is the actually part that I would talk in the next hour. And its converse is gaining the energy. So gaining the energy does not mean that it adds more details. No, it increases uh, the volume. And I would put that in a simple 1D case. Let me say this is our 1D landscape. And I'll put this as f of x. And then by the way of performing opening and I would lose this information. This information is getting lost, this information, right? I am actually smoothing it. But that smoothing is not by simple mean operation or anything, it is by mean of, by with respect to opening operation, and which is non-linear in nature. And then higher scale opening would smoothen it even further. And still larger scale opening would make it like this, would make it like this. And then finally it reaches to some global minimum value. So what is happening? It is losing its information under each cycle of opening, which is nothing but looking at the DEM at different lower resolutions, and it loses its energy. That energy loss is actually useful in computation of the roughness. So here what is involved? Opening operation. Its dual operation is perform closing, dilation followed by erosion, and you have this information is closed. This elevation originally here is increased, and you do another cycle of closing, another cycle of closing, another cycle of closing, and it reaches to global maxima. So what is happening under the actual landscape and above the actual landscape would give us two parameters. One is foreground roughness and another one is background roughness. Typically what we are doing here, we are reducing its resolution from inside and we are reducing its resolution from outside. So these two things are, I don't know in geomorphology how these things would be handled, but in morphology, I am sure these operations are very powerful to really think in a completely different direction.
I don't. In SRTM data, as you said, actually, it is known that every pixel contain the elevation
Yes.
data in the form of this number 0 to 256.
Yeah, number,
So 256 means higher elevation.
yes.
So suppose I am the pixel, I am having a number 80, and this is having a 256. So it is indirectly telling me that this is at higher elevation. Is it right
Yes,
there?
yeah.
So if this is the case, then where this transformation will this equations are help. Actually, this is already.
No, you are only talking about 2 points.
2 points.
And I would say it's a 512 by 512. So there are 512 by 512 grids. And in each grid cell there is some elevation value, right? So those elevation values, we don't just take two elevation values. We take neighborhood elevation values. Within 3 by 3, there are 9 elevation values. Those 9 elevation values we manipulate.
Okay.
If it is within that 9 elevation values, what is the most minimum value? You put at one place and you move your window. That window in that sense is our structuring element.
Okay.
And then you within that other 9 elevation values, what is the most minimum? You put that. You are actually writing a morphological erosion of the total DEM. That is one file. Once all the pixels, all possible neighborhoods, you will go from left to right and top to bottom until the bottom capital N by N pixel, you reach that, and then you generate another 512 by 512 DEM, which is eroded version. And that one you dilate.
Okay.
You take that 3 by 3 again, take most maximum value, and then replace the central value, keep doing it. You get ultimately what? One cycle of opening you have performed. Like that, 2 cycles of opening involve 2 erosions, consecutive erosions, 2 consecutive dilations, and then n cycles of opening, n consecutive erosions followed by n consecutive dilations you get. But visualization of that, probably I will show some images at the end, and so that you can link with this equation.
Yeah. So final question is, so we have some softwares like ArcGIS
Yes.
where they delineate those river network. So they are also using such kind of algorithm to
They
transform.
follow simply within the neighborhood and which is the lower elevation, and let the flow line go towards that. And then again, they also such neighborhood operation.
Yeah.
But it is just by taking only those values. Here, all the values would be based on curvature, it gets varied.
Okay.
I wrote to Jack Dangermond. You know Dangermond,
I
right?
don't know.
ISRI Arkinfo founder.
Okay.
So he has written a nice blurb on my book. He has written in computational geography, all these ideas have to be introduced. He has written actually a comment on my book. So when? So they don't have any commercial interest because
Achha.
as such it is giving them a lot of profits. But these things are more on research side, and to make them operational, they are made operational in many medical image processing. But in geomorphology, yes. But even interpolations, and I have seen, I don't know how Arkinfo works, but the interpolation that I would probably explain would be very interesting, very powerful, and mostly for what are the applications for interpolation? We have 30-meter resolution SRTM DM, 90-meter resolution SRTM DM, and Ramendra was actually showing that he has derived some parameters, and are those parameters scale invariant? But taking by computing those parameters from 30-meter and 90-meter resolution by ignoring so many in between the resolutions and trying to get some scale invariant parameter is not proper. You can interpolate between 30 and 90 meters, and can you really interpolate what should have been the DN? It may not be exactly the same as what should have been taken by a satellite at a 50-meter resolution, but this data would really help you to make highly discrete data. Trying to show that highly discrete data in a real time mode, I think you require interpolations. You require interpolations. Another great example is you have 20-meter contour and 40-meter contour. You want to interpolate in between. It would be very interesting because it's actually easy also. It is not just at equal distance you will see a probably 30-meter contour, and it follows the whole geometry and its spatial positions. And then of course our B. B is very important. If you tune your B, the interpolated line would not be at the center. You will get it close to the 20-meter interval. That's how the whole topography is controlled. Now, can we control the whole topography by B? Theoretically, I'll say yes.
Thank you.
So we can discuss all these things during lunch. It's already late.
Listen to my talk after lunch. And I'll assure you that I don't sleep, I think. You can also pay attention. So like binary mathematical morphology and grayscale mathematical morphology, within transformations also we have binary skeletonization and grayscale skeletonization. And in the grayscale skeletonization, using DEM directly, and you can compute the skeleton of f of xy as, and f is the function, that is the DEM, and directly use erosion by nth size b. Here erosion is grayscale erosion. Remember the equation that I have shown. Minimum of f of x plus I and y plus j belong to B. This is the equation we use. So if I perform recursively erosions, I would call this as F erosion by n size b. This is n times. Same is the case like binary. But here what happens, in binary you have seen erosion means it is getting contracted. But in grayscale, it is actually a surface. DM is like surface. You have very high elevation, you have low elevation. This is like a random topography. Random topography. The best example is you just create a kind of a crumpled sheet of paper, and then how you have valleys and ridges and surfacial variation. And when you perform erosion and it actually reduces its heights, how those heights are varying, I told you, and you take a 3 by 3 neighborhood and most minimum value, you replace the central value with the most minimum value. And then you do that process for entire DEM. And converse, its dual operation is the maximum value you replace, the central value is replaced with the maximum value. And when you do that in a cascade form, as in the cases of binary morphological opening, and we can do grayscale morphological opening. And it, by performing openings, it keeps losing information. That one will come back when I speak about granulometries. For the sake of skeletonization, same equation, but X has become F here because X is just a planar set. F is a surface, it's a function. And then that eroded version we take and then perform opening with arbitrary size B. Except the fact that the source is not the planar set as was the case in binary skeletonization. Here it is a surface. It's a surface, and then you take the subtraction. In set case, we take the reverse solidus as the set subtraction. In algebraic case and in a functional case, we take algebraic subtraction. And you get for all different n values, you take the suprema for all n values. What is suprema? For different n values, you get a different skeletal subsets from the grayscale DEM. And for all n values ranging from 0, 1, 2, 3 until some significantly high value, that is a capital N I say, and all the outputs, they are like layered information and point wise maxima you record. This is the symbol for suprema. This is the symbol for suprema. So suprema is point wise maxima. If you have several outputs, for n is equivalent to 0, you get one output, n is equivalent to 1, like that n is equivalent to 2, you get another output. For n is equivalent to, let us say, capital N, you have so many outputs you got. So this is all gridded. This is the DEM's outputs that you have generated out of this transformation. Point wise for all these outputs, what is the first point value? So which is the maximum value out of all these first points? That you will write it as the output. And second points, out of all these second points, which is the maximum value? You write it as the output here. That is the meaning of this. So that should give you the valley connectivity network directly from DEM. Then you might ask me, why we have learned that such a complicated process? In binary skeletonization, skeleton would be well connected, indeed 1 pixel wide thick, but here because of the grayscale variations and the network that we get would be not continuous. There will be many discontinuities. Suddenly a line would come and then there will be some kind of discontinuities. And whereas in binary case, it is a perfectly connected lines. In grayscale, there will be several spurious values that we call them as salt and pepper noise. Suddenly, within a dark region, what is the dark region, pitch dark region in DEM? Probably it's a topographic depression with values 0 elevations. Suddenly, if you see one white dot in between that, so with 255 gray shade, that is spurious. Some noise coming from somewhere. The same time on hilltop, spatially distributed hilltop at the elevation of 255 peak, if you see a black dot there, and it is very rare to see a kind of some watery element or topographic depression, deep depression with, so these are spurious. So how to avoid those spurious thing, and DMs come with noise. DMs come with noise, and that noise, one way is perform, if this is DEM, perform one opening followed by one closing. This would help you removing white dots. They call it as ASF white. This ASF is alternate sequential filter. So what are there here? And there is one erosion followed by dilation, because this is opening, and followed by another dilation, followed by another erosion. There is erosion, dilation, and erosion, because this is opening, this is open, this is closing, this is opening. Opening followed by closing would actually reduce white dots if they are really spurious white dots. And its dual operation is ASF black. ASF black. It is closing followed by opening. Typically, this goes with this would filter out that isolated black dots. Performing these ASF white and ASF black, one after the other, your DEM would be with the noise free, but at the same time, you lose one, very significant information from the elevation, the superficial undulations. But that is where this B has to be very carefully chosen. If B is significantly bigger, you lose a lot of information. If B is very smallest possible, you cannot take that as one single pixel. One single pixel requires neighborhood support. You cannot perform anything because everything is a pixel. And you require at least some 2 by 2 size structuring element, and then you can create what is the origin and where is the centroid, and then what will happen when you rotate it to 180 degrees, all that you have to take care of. Okay, this is a slightly a different side, and with this probably I will leave the skeletonization part, and binary skeletonization, and why we use binary skeletonization is to avoid some discontinuities in the output that we get out of performing grayscale skeletonization directly on DEM. That is the best answer. But you can always try, if it is highly hilly terrain, there should not be any problem. And apply this set of equations, and you get the best intricate network. In the hilly terrain, you don't face this discontinuity problem. But if it is slightly, gently sloped region, and you face many problems. And then there are many other ways, and why we are always choosing B like this in a compact form? Why we are choosing B like this? Can't we take B like this? And and if B is like this, if you say this is B, I would say this is a disk in the 8 connectivity grid, and this B I can decompose into 4 directional elements. I would say this is B1, and center is here. Origin is at this place, and then this is in this direction. This is northwest and southeast direction, and I can also take this is B2, this is B3, and then this is B4. So if you take the union of B1, B2, B3, B4, you get B. Performing these operations individually with directional structuring elements and taking the suprema of all the results that you get with individual one-dimensional structuring elements would be more superior than just getting a skeleton by with a compact structuring element like this. Probably I will share some of those old publications which we tried on some hilly regions. You can try that. And with that, let me stop about the skeletonization. But with this knowledge, as I mentioned, one noise.
Sorry. So when I download the SRTMs, there are options I can see: noise-free DEM, void-free DEM. So is it same or different?
Noise free in the sense, probably in SRTM there are some missing values.
Okay.
And there they could not generate that.
Yeah.
If that is what they are telling, it is noisy and noise free.
Like when you're saying this is noise, like some spurious,
Yes.
I can understand this is a noise, and some if they're saying void free, void, void,
Void free.
void,
Void free in the sense,
they do not
void
have
is a gap.
gap.
Those
So-
gaps are actually, they don't have data there.
Data,
No, that is different.
that's different.
That's different.
So
But how to fill those voids
Huh.
is another different challenge.
okay,
That void is significantly smaller.
That's
I think by taking the neighborhood values, you can extrapolate.
okay.
Three
I
by
think
three.
averaging is one crude approach.
That if we do this skeletonization process on gray level scale,
Ah.
because what is happening? Because in DEM we are having ridges also, valleys also, and we are applying the same operation for a DEM image. So won't it be wrong, because same operation if you are applying for the ridge and the valley at the same time?
No, actually, your operations do not know what is valley and what is ridge. It's just a data. And those ridges and valleys, after you perform, then only we judge. These are the values, because these are actually local minima. All valley connectivity networks are local minima, we are connecting it. Those local minima, typically that V-shaped, delta-shaped granulations, we are isolating all possible delta-shaped granulations by performing that skeletonization-based smoothing.
So, you mean from that image when we are getting the pixels, we are first ourselves choosing those maximum and minimum values, on that basis valleys and ridges will be produced. Is that so?
No, because DEM will have the normalized values
Yes.
between 0 to 255. And we don't define any other thing. We just take a planar structuring element, whether it is with 5 element of 3 by 3 or all 9 elements with 3 by 3. I think that takes care of it. And but with 5 element, you get more intricate network. With 9 elements, and it would be, you may miss a few, minor crenulations. But with that 5 elements within 3 by 3 would be very fine network that we get.
No, my point is like in that binary image, we were basically applying operation like erosion, then dilation, to just first for the losing of information and then reconstructing one. But then if we do it for DEM,
Yes, direct function. Okay.
then it won't be wrong because for the hill you have to apply erosion, and for that you don't
No.
have to apply for valley there.
No, no. That's what I'm telling. And these operations do not know what is hill, what is valley.
So directly on that.
When you perform erosion, it actually decreases the function. I would show it probably. When you perform erosion, it would be like this. When you perform that eroded version, when you smoothen it, and you get smoothened out this corresponding sharp peak. And these are the points. I am showing it in a 1D landscape, but in 2D, and those points, these are the points, are the flow paths of the streamlines. And all that would be preserved as you keep increasing this n. And to from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, like that, if you increase, and you keep getting these corresponding value points. You can try probably. So if you have these routines, morphological operation routines, and then takes one highly intricate hilly region, and then you apply, many times within n2, 3, you will get the highly intricate network for hilly region. But it's always good to compare with whatever you get from Arkinfo. Arkinfo I have seen, and I have a PhD student who is a senior scientist in ISRO, and he tells, and much better than this I am getting in Arkinfo for hilly region. But we really didn't try, and theoretically we are talking for tidal regions we may get like streak-like information, because there cannot really detect which is the descent thing, and suddenly you have a peak value here, and very slightly different value at one particular corner, it draws a kind of line here, and which is actually not correct. So these are some of the things, but I would say entire skeletonization.
Hello, so how can I select that 3 cross 3 or 5 cross 5 matrix for
You mean
the,
B?
yeah, that is a
Doing it.
structural element you would say.
Yeah, that is that's always a difficult question to answer, because if you have, many people ask, I have this DEM, which is the right B for me to use for this?
Yeah, exactly.
And that comes under adaptive morphology. And which is the D most adaptive to the data that we are investigating? But what we do is we take a family of structuring elements. A family of structuring element, I would say, the combination of all four directional structuring elements that I have shown are the family of structuring elements. So one is that 3 by 3 with 9 elements, 3 by 3 with 5 elements, and then I have hexagonal structuring element and octagonal structuring element. There is a long list of structuring elements, but what is the right structuring element? It's still a question. What we do is we just take from Euclidean shapes. These are all Euclidean features, like square, circle, hexagon, octagon, and those things. But for choosing a skeleton, and I would tell you that the 5 element with 3 by 3 is the best one. It would really match with actual network that we get. Actual network that we get. But if there is a specific application in the distributions, when you have, we are talking about grains. There are so many sand grains on the screen with different sizes and shapes. What we do, we will take a family of structuring elements, and each grain would be investigated with all the structuring elements. And do you want to find out which are all the grains very close to a circle? Suppose if that is the task that you have. And in the family of structuring element, you have circular structuring elements, rectangular structuring elements, triangular structuring elements. Obviously, with the circular structuring element, you get one roughness parameter, very unique parameter for all the circular grains, which are in circle in shape. And this is for filtering purpose. But when it comes again, is there a right way to choose a structuring element? It's all the data dependent, and it also depends on the type of features that you want to extract. So that is again domain specific. Some people have interest only to isolate the boundary of a grain, just boundary of a grain. And I would simply use the structuring element what I have shown, that rhombical type, diamond type, and I will shrink and subtract from the original, I get the perfect boundary. It depends on what is the end application that you are really wanting to show. So I will give you another example, and there is an image, probably let us say DEM, and there is another DEM. What is that B which would tell that the distance between this DEM is just 1? So can I create that kind of B? For that you have to investigate both the things, both the images. One way is compute some kind of median function in between. So how many minimum number of, least number of medians that you can create in between A and B DEMs? And if there is no median that you can compute with a specific structuring element, and I would say, oh, these two are similar with respect to this structuring element. Again, intuitively, and if I will show one object, and is this object regular or irregular? And then we will be tempted to say, by comparing that object drawn on the board with a circle, because our eyes tries to integrate everything in a circular form. With respect to a circle, probably that is very irregular. With respect to the same irregular shape which I choose it as a B, and it is highly regular. You understand? And this is actually called homothety. Homothety. Homothety is if this is a circle, probably this is an object, and these two are homothety. These two are homothety. Whereas you look at this, and these two are also homothety. These two are also homothety. This object, with respect to circle, it is irregular, but with respect to this, it is highly regular. How do you quantify that? How do you quantify that? That is where we have the process called granulometries. So granulometries would be a kind of filtering process, a shape size based filtering process. And we were talking about the ratios of sand grains, and there are conventional sand grain ratio computations, and using morphology, all that can be kept aside. We can compute with openings, we can compute the longest axis. With same opening, we can compute the transverse length. Same opening, you can see many of the ratios, elongation ratios and the circularity ratios. And we take a largest inscribable circle and smallest outscribed circle, and we take the ratio of these two things. If the ratio is too far away from one, and we say it is highly elongated. And those things we don't need to do, and we can just leave it to mathematical morphology, and we can actually compute these two things automatically with what is that nth cycle of opening that this object requires. I will put one simple equation, I think now you will understand. This n max, what is the maximum number of cycles that an object requires. An object, let us say set X or a sand grain X with respect to B. And we write that as X opening by nth size B is not equivalent to empty set, but X opening by n plus 1 size B is an empty set. Right? Here, minimum of n such that this is the equation. This would explain you about the size of X with respect to B. Remember, when we have looked at this simple 3 by 3 X and with respect to this B, if you perform one cycle of opening, you get this, which is a non-empty set. When you perform 2 cycles of opening and it becomes empty, which means this set X is smaller than size 2B, but lesser than or equal to, larger than or equal to B, 1B. This equation tells the size pattern of X with respect to B. You keep changing B and you will get a different result. That's where sometimes choosing a family of structuring elements defined arbitrarily are good. But trying to derive what is that B, here you should understand that what makes this irregular object, seemingly looking irregular object, when do you say that it is highly regular? So when you choose its homothetic. So deriving a homothetic object for an object that we are investigating is easier. I mentioned object, but deriving a B for a function like DEM, it is very difficult, because as it is, DEM is very complex, because you don't have just black and white, and you have many shades in between. But it's always you have if you are very keen to know about adaptive morphology, there is one nice PhD thesis which I have reviewed. This is Vlad Kurik. Vlad Kurik got his PhD in adaptive morphology. He has given mostly distance-based approaches to derive most appropriate B to choose for mostly in image processing studies. You can have a look at it. He is from Uppsala University.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so now to continue with the actual thing, and I will see if time permits, I will show quickly the results through PowerPoint slides. And I have two more major portions to complete, that is the first one being the granulometries. Granulometries, and in this granulometries again you have binary and grayscale. So binary granulometries would be very nice for studying the binary objects. Good example is sand grains. The grayscale granulometries would be good for grayscale images. Example is DEM. So this would actually give us shape size spectrum of an object or a field. We call in mostly in our geological studies spatial objects and spatial fields. Spatial objects are just black and white objects. Fields are like functions like this. In shape size spectrum, and then it has different names. It is also called pattern spectrum. It is also called pattern spectrum. And as is the case with other operations, where you have dual operations for every operation in morphology, we have granulometries and anti-granulometries. What would they provide? They provide some indices. Some people call those indices as granulometric index. Some people will call it as morphological entropy. This morphological entropy, I like the morphological entropy word. So that word tells, does the field that we are investigating have capacity to change with perturbations? What are the perturbations? Some people say that endogenic process is some tectonic activity which is so systematic, and exogenic process is weather related things which are not so systematic, and these two things would operate in a cascadic form, not to the same degree, but in a nonlinear fashion. If they follow, to the same degree, and we should have seen the whole Earth's surface as just flat surface, but we see it in a nonlinear way. And if we say that erosions and dilations are, let us say, some kind of perturbations, how a specific object would react to this erosion followed by dilation? Something is building and something is destroying. Probably let us see that a dilation is a kind of building process. Erosion is a kind of destruction process. These two things are happening with the same V. Let us see that at the same time V is not homothetic to the object, and then you start seeing some kind of nonlinear effects. That loss of information with increasing cycles of perturbation, I would say the perturbation is a word which involves two processes. Something is building and something is destroying. These are the things happening in a cascadic form. And if those two sub-processes are influencing an object, how that object evolves over a period of time. If the object is very stable in the sense with respect to B, what is that B that would make that object very stable? The B that is homothetic to the object. Then under the process, it doesn't lose any information. If you have one specific sand grain or a rock body, how it is evolving, and I read about that weeds. Somebody has written in scientific reports, nature scientific reports, that weeds shape analysis or something. So some rock was actually getting eroded, and then it is coming up to the river mouth, and so it has become, very irregular rock body has become smoothened because of the geomorphological or geological process. So that evolution can we really simulate? We can simulate that, and with simple process of erosions, dilations, different things. And The moment it reaches the stability, and however number of opening cycles that you perform, it doesn't change. On that, I would say there is less entropy there. It has no further capacity to change. It has no further capacity to change. But there are very young basins, and they say, and it has a lot of capacity to change. And that is what is quantified through hypsometric integrals. The hypsometric integral value is some lesser than 20%. They say this is older basins and there is no much capacity to change. But if it is younger basins and it has a huge capacity to change for what? Capacity to change with time in response to some kind of perturbations, some kind of process. So such things, if you have a, let us say, a sand grain like this, and what happens over a period of time, and there is a likely chance may become like this, and provided the kind of B that I choose is of a kind of circular structuring element. And then it is worthwhile to really compute a kind of index called shapiness index. This is very important thing, and which has come through this pattern spectra analysis. What we do is we compute, let us call this as this object as X. That X you open with n size B, and you subtract. When you open it, erosion followed by dilation is always a decreasing function. It reduces its value. It may be just the same or it may lose its value. So you get some kind of positive value out of this subtraction. Suppose you didn't lose anything, and the loss of information from this to this is just 0. And then you perform X opened by n plus 1 size B, and you find out what is the, when you subtract it, there is no loss of information. And it is happening until X opened by capital N minus 1 size B, it is still 0. At X opened by n size B, still 0. But X opened by n plus 1 size B has completely vanished the object. And then you subtract this from this, you get a huge big value, let us say some 100 pixels we got. 100 pixels we got. So this 100 is also equivalent to the area of X. Whole object is lost at the critical state, that is the last level, but you didn't lose any information here. So you know when it will happen? It will happen when B and X are homothetic. Only then it will happen. If B and X are non-homothetic, you start seeing some values here. So for your question, I think this is also one of the answers. How to choose the B, and it all depends on, do you want to, how do you choose B? Do you want that B to be homothetic to X? And whether it is homothetic or non-homothetic, this is the test we should make. So with this process, as you keep on doing it, at cycle, when n cycle, 0, 1, 2, 3, you didn't lose any information. So what is that you are computing here? Area of X minus area of X opened by n size B. This is actually the pattern spectrum values you are getting. At the 0th level, you didn't lose the, value is 0. Here it is 0. Here it is 0. Here it is 0. N minus 1 it is 0. At nth level it is 0. At n plus 1th level, the total area that you got is the equivalent to the area of x, that is also 100. You lost everything at 1. Again, this is, what is the structuring element shape? Probably let me put, this is like a square block. Probably the object that I am investigating is a square block. So then what the computation is, area of n plus 1th, x opened by n plus 1th size b divided by area of x. If it is 1 and you say b and x are homothetic to each other, you lost all information at one cycle, but you didn't lose any information at these levels. This is also called shapeliness index. Now, for grain size, grain shape analysis, you keep a family of structuring elements, you define them, and because each shape has some significance, and if you know the significance of each shape and how this rock should have been reached to this kind of form after so many millions of years, and I have some set of family of structuring elements. So this is close to which structuring element? And this is close to a structuring element which is yielding the value 1 as shapeliness index. And it is not close morphologically to any other structuring element which is giving shapeliness index of less than 1, right? So what are all the things involved here? There is erosion, there is a dilation, there is opening, and there is simple subtractions, there is multiscaling more importantly. So when we do shape analysis, we take one particular object and then we compute those measures, directional distances and lengths and all that, we leave it. But this process does lot of multiscaling. The multiscaling is happening with openings of cycle 0 to cycle capital N. So that is the advantage in morphology based morphological analysis, rather than just taking at one particular scale you take these measures and then you do that process, right? So I will go further. This shapeliness index is one of the parts, and I will write simple definition. Let x be an object
Sir, yeah, before going to this, um, so in this case, if I have a problem like so there's a source and there's a place where sediments are deposited, and I know a distance. So my objective is to understand, I know the shape of the grain. So, and I know from there it is coming. And I know it is coming from there in the form of landslide. Directly it came out of the rock. So initially that B that you're talking about, I know the B.
You know,
I know the shape of the B of the at the source, and I know the final X. So simply by knowing these two things, can I not able to tell what rate that that B has changed to X? So if this is so, then what will be the significance of this number of steps like erosion, dilation, again erosion, dilation? Can you describe, explain a little bit like in that way? Instead of simply subtracting the B with X, I can get the information that at what rate the grain has changed into granular. I know this is very simple way. So how this will help me to
I will probably try to answer this question. You know the shape of that grain at when it forms, and you know what is its shape at present now, and I can quantify its shape at that time using this process. I can also quantify the shape of this grain now, and what would be the difference in the index.
yes,
I can tell that. That is one aspect. And which I am yet to cover is how this was evolved over a
yes,
period of time. I can give you a complete sequence. And probably here it is, let us say this is 256 years back. This is at, currently it is now. And I can give you some idea how it should have been looking after 128th year, and then after 64th year, after 196th year, after 32nd year. This sequence I can create and provide you. If you have benchmark data in between, you can always make comparisons, both geometric comparison and this index based comparison. This index based comparison. Many a times it won't fool us, because you know the source, you know the target. In between, it has to happen only in between. It won't really fool us. And that is a beautiful part of interpolation. Beautiful part of interpolation. A grain has been evolved. So this is the question I always used to ask myself. Something which was existing, which was highly irregular, is becoming regular, or something which was existing, which was very regular, is becoming irregular? This is always a question to me. And as per this nonlinear physics, and we should know there are phase changes in between. There are phase changes in between. But so billions of years, and how do we really bring down to the discrete time and understand that process? I think these are some of the ideas. So we have to really take, and then. But this is a valid and viable study one can really perform. You have two things. So take simply their planar shape and this planar shape, and computing what has exactly happened over a period of 256 years or so for this rock to become like this, and linking that with probably process and dating. I don't know, but there may be. No, I could see many other applications in quantitative stratigraphy. You have some layer-wise information, and what are the relationships? The relationships I want to give with respect to distances. With respect to distances, there is a circular object, there is a circular object. Both are identical. With distance, and there is no distance, and from here to here, the distance is same. But the other thing, and how dissimilar are these two things, source and target? If there is no much dissimilarity, if both are say similar, and what is the inference? I think you should be able to, because you are all
they might have come very quickly.
maybe.
Yeah.
And if there is a huge dissimilarity, and then how do you quantify that dissimilarity? Is it just with some kind of shape ratios? Not necessarily. I would try to compute the distance, morphological distance. Morphological distance. No, some of the things, one day it's not possible. These are actually 26 lectures I used to give in Italy, slowly going. And I would recommend you, probably you can have a look at the NPTEL lectures I have posted on YouTube. And I have gone very slowly, but not on the board, but on piece of paper. And I think that will be some support for this, quickly explain.
Thank you.
Okay, so let X be an object and B be a probing rule or a structuring element, computation of computation of granulometric index, granulometric index of x with respect to b involves multi-scale binary morphological opening. So the equations are very simple. I think you can easily visualize and then understand. It would be like there is a parameter called pattern spectrum at the scale n of x with respect to b. So this will be computed as x opening by n size b, x opening by n plus 1 size b. Always the area of this would be smaller than or equal to this one, because this is a decreasing function. We are talking about the object like this. When you perform erosion followed by dilation, you tend to lose this sharp peaks. It is a smoothing operation. The smoothing operation. So this n changes. Probably at the next higher level n, this is the erosion, and when you perform the that many number of dilations, and you may lose even larger information. Typically what happens when you have an object like this, and when you are choosing B like a square block, you know what will happen at capital N plus 1th level? You would end up seeing one object like this. This gets smoothened to this extent. An object gets smoothened to this extent. This is the last but one level. What is the last level? It vanishes everything, because the whole object would become a part of the capital N plus 1 size structuring element that is bigger than this. So, but just before that level, and you will see this is the output. This is the output. In between, it evolves in many different ways. That is what we are actually trying to compute here. The pattern spectrum value, you are actually taking the area. What is the area of the object? The cardinality of the set. You compute all the elements within the set, right? So probably it has certain value of, let us say that this particular object has some 250 pixel units, 200 pixel units. So with n is equivalent to 0, nothing has happened on the x, and when n is equivalent to 0 plus 1, it is 1, and there is some opening happening. That opened version is contained in the previous cycle of opened version, and you subtract the value. Let me again put, if this is the set and this is the B, and because these two are homothetic, you lose nothing at all initial cycles. Only at the last but one level, probably the smallest erosion is several cycles erosion, and same number of dilations when you do it, gets you back your original object, because these two are homothetic to each other. But next level erosion, and it vanishes everything, and there is nothing more to see there, the dilation process. But that last but one level, whatever that we get, x opened by nth level, nth size B would be the area of that, and the area of original x would be the same, and then in turn you get this index as 1. This is a shapeliness index, but here you look at, I am saying this is x opened by n size B is showing like this. It has certain area, and that area is much smaller than the total area of this object. There is a huge difference. Let us say this is having some 300 pixels, this is having only 100 pixels. And take the area of this and area of x, that is 100 by 300. And what is it showing? And it is a value of some 0.33333 something. This is the shapiness index, because the b and the x that we have considered are too dissimilar to each other. When they are geometrically identical, you get the shapiness index of 1. But this would be good for very simple objects like sand grains. But applying these ideas for functions, it would get you the roughness, superficial roughness. I'll come to that point after a little while. And this is the pattern spectrum of the object. And from that you can also compute the shapiness index. And then we have probabilities here. The probability, I would simply put as P. At the scale n of x with respect to b is typically pattern spectrum of nth order x with respect to b divided by area of x. You are actually computing the probability values here. For all cycles, at all cycles you compute this. When n is equivalent to 0 and you have a pattern spectrum value at the order 0. When n is equivalent to 1, pattern spectrum value at order 1. Like that you go until there is no further change, it reaches to some kind of convergence. And all those values you divide those pattern spectrum values of different orders with the total area, you get the probability values. Those probability values, and I will put P log P is actually entropy equation, the Shannon's entropy equation, and you sum all the values from n is equivalent to 0 to capital N, take the negative of that, you get uncertainty index of x with respect to b. This uncertainty index is nothing but granulometric index, it is also called morphological entropy. Higher the uncertainty index, higher the roughness with respect to b. With respect to b. So always b plays very important role, and how nice it would be if we know for a specific geomorphic basin, what is that b would explain everything about that basin. Everything about that basin. Probably with more rigorous computations, and we can head towards that. This is about a simple binary object. Now we take, I will put this as let f be a kind of spatial field like our DEM. Let f be a function and b be a probing rule. And you might ask me why probing rule is always flat with zeros and ones. You can choose non-flat structuring elements also. Non-flat in the sense, all through I am showing just zeros and ones, whether it is for binary or for the grayscale. And we can always derive, hemisphere and cone-like things, and then we follow again some distance functions there to create non-flat structuring elements. Non-flat structuring elements. So, for explanation sake, it would be easier if I use the same B or a structuring element. Computation of granulometric index of F with respect to B involves multiscale, grayscale morphological opening. What it tells, and it could be the same equations, but talking that on grayscale, it is actually surface. When you do these erosions and dilations in a cyclic form, and that surface would actually loses its information. And DEM, so which is looking, there is some brighter regions and darker regions. In between shades you have, and what is very dominant there is probably the darker, brighter regions are dominant, under the evolution of cycles of opening, that brighter DEM slowly getting towards darker DEM. So how do we compute the area there? Here I said in binary case cardinality of the set, but area of the function of xy, how we compute is sum of f of xy values over all xy values. This is the area, which means in a DEM, and you will sum all the grayscale values. Those grayscale values are not just zeros and ones. You have values ranging between 0 to 255. When you sum that, that is what is the equation there. All f of xy values over xy values, and you will just sum them. That is the energy. That energy under the cycles of opening, it loses its energy. That area gets diminished. And finally, it will, all the grid cell pixels would be turned into global minimum value. What is the global minimum value? Let us say in a DEM it is showing the least elevation value was 64 and maximum value is 255. Global maximum is 255, global minimum is 64. Under recursive cycles of iterative cycles of opening, and all the pixel values would become 64. That's where it gets converged. That is the end. After that, however number of times you perform, flat is flat and there is nothing. It cannot gain anything, and it doesn't go down. So from that highly rugged surface to flat, and in between, what kind of evolution it took, under that evolution, what was the loss of information at each step, starting from n is equivalent to 0, it loses information. Suddenly you may not see, no information was lost, which means between that scale, there are no objects there in that surface. And you can plot the shape size spectrum like on the x-axis you say that structuring element size, on the y-axis loss of information, the pattern spectrum, what we have seen there. But that would be in a grayscale case the same equations like area of the opening of a function by n size b and minus area of the opening of the function with n plus 1 size b, and then this is telling you about pattern spectrum of nth order of f with respect to b, and then subsequently we have again the probability of nth order of f with respect to b is area of, no, I will just put it this pattern spectrum of f with respect to b divided by area of the function. That area of the function is this, and these values would be in between 0 and 1, satisfying the law of probability. And further you take probability of p log p and sum with n is equivalent to 0 to capital N. So this is the uncertainty index of f with respect to b. This is for the roughness, whereas this one is object complexity. That's also roughness, probably outline roughness. This is the superficial roughness, and these roughness values, I am sure it would vary from basin to basin, watershed to watershed. And I would say this is a global granulometric index value that we are computing. And what happens if I make this B into directional? So as I have shown, like this is B1 and this is B2. So this is B3 and this is B4. With each of the direction you get a different roughness value, which are independent of the roughness that we computed with B. Now I have with I is 1, 2, 3, 4. So direction specific roughness value I get within a basin, the DEM within a basin, and in which direction it possesses highest roughness, in which direction it possesses least roughness, and would those values provide some insights for us? This is where we have written the paper that I shared with her. Higher directional roughness index and lower directional roughness index out of 4. So can we make them into still more directions? Probably I can take, so this and this is one direction, V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, V6, V7, V8, 8 directions. If you want even more number of directions and you take the primitive size B much bigger, and then you have, you can rotate it so many 16 directions and 32 directions you can increase. And those directionals, you can actually compute a spectrum of directional roughness values. What that spectrum would really tell us, and can that be linked with the geomorphic process? And because after all, the roughness and structure and function has very good relationship, whether it is in geological context or in biological context. So can we really relate to those roughness values with those things? But I didn't spend much time on granulometries, but you look at some of the works on granulometries, not necessarily in the geological context. And I will share one paper with probably Amender, you can forward them. There is a pattern spectra analysis through multi-scale morphology or something, which was a very nice paper written by one Petros Margos. He was an electrical engineering professor in Harvard University. And he was the one who popularized this mathematical morphology a lot in Northern America. So unless America popularizes it, it won't get popularized. This is more European. And he has written some 10 to 15 papers, ideas given by these inventors, Professor John Serra and Georges Matron. In a technical reports, he has popularized that. He has written in a really state-of-the-art way, in top IEEE transactions. And those papers, if you read it with this introduction, you will really understand. But he has shown the application for general images. But showing those applications for DEM like data would be hugely beneficial for assistance.
So, in terms of drainage network system, I want to understand what does it mean by directional roughness. A two basin is suppose. So in
Yes,
terms of
we could, but I don't really confidently say. But we have seen higher directional roughness index, in which direction it is showing highest roughness, has some relationship with the orientation of the basin,
yeah, okay.
flow of the network.
No, first I want to understand what is the meaning of directional roughness for two basin. Like suppose two basins are, one is highly rough, and another is not rough. In terms of drainage network, how does it look? I cannot make a picture in my mind.
Okay, if it is, if the basin is not so rough,
Rough. How does it look?
and in terms of drainage network, probably the network is very sparse. It's not very dense. And whereas in the highly rugged, rough basin, and the network is very intricate, and it's very closely spaced, which this statement can also be supported with the characteristic of space filling ability. So a basin with sparse network, the network is very sparse. And if you take the drainage density, with even simple drainage density, you can make the demarcation. In a highly rough basin, obviously the network is very intricate. The length of the network is as close as possible to the total area of the basin. And in turn, the even fractal dimension would also show that distinction. In the sparse network, you have a low fractal dimension. In a dense network, you have high fractal dimension. Going towards 2, and it is slightly above 1 sparse network. These are also roughness parameters.
Then orientation of the basin, they said, why it comes to understand the orientation of the basin
But
too.
I don't dare to really confirm that. But we could see in majority of, we have handled about 100 watersheds which were given in, not 100 watersheds, there we have given only 31 watersheds. But we have done some work on physiographically 3 distinct basins. One is lower Indus basin, highly hilly terrain. Other one is Wardha basin, more of in a flat regions. There is another desert basin, Barmer basin, desert area. But that's also one of these sub basins of Indus basin. And in desert basin, it's the physiographic structure is completely different. There is no intricacy there, and only dunes are there, some kind of dunes. So when we partitioned, actually I didn't cover partitioning the basins. That's another beautiful topic. So when we partition the basins, it's just like watershed partition, and we could see in Barmer basin, most of the watersheds are oriented towards one particular side, and that we could see with respect to the high directional roughness value. And whereas in lower Indus basin, they are distributed in all directions. If I take out of for each basin, each watershed, we are computing 5 roughness values. One is with global roughness value, that is with B, and other 4 are B1, B2, B3, B4. Out of this B1 to B4, in which direction it is yielding highest roughness, and we are actually showing them in that particular direction it has more roughness. And such kind of things we are unable to generalize, oh, they are all focused towards one particular direction for lower Indus basin. Whereas for Barmer basin, yes, most of the things are in northeastern to southwestern direction. Highest thing were. But before generalizing it, and if we generalize it, and that is a lot of values for pieces, but we have to probably derive some other parameters by considering these roughness values. And I was vaguely thinking that is there a median deviation, median absolute deviation? There is a kind of measure called MAD. I don't know, these are all, I don't have any logic why I have chosen that. I felt that should we really try median absolute deviation among all these set of roughness values to come out with some mathematically or statistically viable inference. These roughness values, as we are talking about a simple rock body, the surface which is evolving, and is the roughness value evolving from very high roughness to low roughness over a period of time? And are the surfaces really evolving with time? So if they are really evolving, can we really capture that the degree of change with respect to these roughness values? It is not just the technique, and the scale is important. At what scale of DEM that we are using? And I was mentioning 30 meter and 90 meter resolution DEM, and he has done, and then somebody is asking, are they scale invariant? We need more DEMs of the same region at more spatial resolution. It is not just at 30 and 90. And we require at 40, 50, 60, and then you derive some parameters, and I am sure it would follow some kind of scale invariance. After all, it is nature. what it requires some hard thinking and support by senior faculty, particularly for youngsters. So give them complete freedom and do this, and you get your salary. Such kind of setup is there. Wonderful. So I say we enjoy a lot of luxury in our institute. We can teach. There is no restriction that you have to teach only this. So I teach all this for math students. We have powerful BMath flagship programs. Many of them are maths Olympiad winners. And they enjoy, and they don't take much time to understand, but sometimes it is. But they don't take these ideas into geoscience because it doesn't fetch them money.
Okay, so in case of this x based on b, if I convert this thing in some simple language like x is the final condition and b is the initial state of the thing. So will it going to decrease? Will it going to change the mathematics here? Like initial condition, I'm considering the ideal condition. In initial shape is the shape when all the situations are ideal. This is my B, and X, the present condition. I quantify the X now. So if I go by this way, what kind of things I need to take care of to come up with
Actually, you want to transform B into X.
B into X? Yeah. So is
want
it
to
the same thing?
transform B
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
X.
Is it the same thing I'm talking about? Yeah. Something different. It is different from this X by B that you explained here.
If you want to transform B into X, I would use X as the probing rule on B. Because X is the current situation.
Yes.
B is the initial condition.
Yes.
And I define, because I require a rule to transform B to X.
Yes.
And I will use X as the, the smallest homothetic of X as my rule to transform B.
Oh. Achha.
As my rule to transform B. But if it is a simple planar objects, all those things are possible.
Okay. So example problem is like there is an area in, let's say, in Tibet. There is a pattern of drainage. There is a maybe fractal dimension of that drainage network, and so my B will be like a small fold, evolving fold where the drainage is evolving. But initially, actually, it is not like that. I know it's very complex. So
if you are seeing that evolution of the dryness pattern, I think we have probably the B should be in a form of a tree.
tree.
And
Okay.
in fractals, you might have seen there are Peano networks, Melton networks, and Poch curves. And you have seen them?
I don't know this.
So it would go like, if I choose, let us say this is the generator, and let me not use the morphology terms here. Let me use just fractal terms. And this is the generator, and this is the initiator. And using this generating mechanism, at the first level, that initiator has been transformed like this. And at the second level, each segment is following the same rule. And the rule goes with what is the diverging angle, what is the ratio of this segment with this segment, and then my tree keeps growing. The tree keeps going. But this is a kind of a scale-free network. You don't see this in reality. And this fractal network generation would be very interesting. Like I have shown some of the things like you keep you say this is the initiator, and I'll put a kind of generating mechanism like this, and each segment I would transform. I would tell you why it is Hortonian. This square initiator has certain area. That area would be preserved, but the outline kinks would be increasing. And this segment I would put it like this, and then this segment, the amount I am projecting and I am also removing from the object. Right? The initiator area did not change, but you have transformed into a kind of fractal basin, and which is the basic requisite to say that this basin is Hortonian. Area should be constant across the scales, but the network length would increase infinitely. And then now you compute, you know about the skeletonization. If you compute the skeleton, and this would have a typical structure, right? This is your skeleton. If you iterate this further, each of this segment would be transformed according to this rule, and then you will have even more intricacy, and then the new segments are joining. Area is same, length is increasing, and then you can see that the drainage density is increasing with scale, and which is the primary characteristic to tell that the basin is indeed Hortonian. Like this you can generate, and if you know what is the structurally viable rule which is being following in the process of tree generation. So it also generates a question like, prompts a question like, why certain trees grow vertically much faster than in horizontally. Certain trees they grow both vertically and horizontally in the same speed, and that would really allow us to talk about Hurst and Hack's exponent. I think many of you know about Hurst exponent and Hack exponent, area length relationship, and longitudinal length and transverse length relationship. And again, these two are very interesting exponents which were given by civil engineers and mathematicians, and which are also important parameters in multifractal parameter computation. I think fractals would help you understanding these things. Shall I show some pictures or after the break? No. I'll show some pictures and then I'll talk about interpolation. With that, I'll go to take my flight.